China is vast, covering 7% of the planet's land surface. In this series, I've explored soaring mountains.
I feel on top of the world.
And sweeping grasslands. I've crossed China's greatest deserts and jungles. This is the only country with elephants in the south and reindeer in the north. I've encountered them and many other extraordinary and rare creatures. Join me on my adventures in untamed China.
To start my final adventure in untamed China, I've come here to Xining, the capital of Shanghai province.
But I'm not stopping. I've got a train to catch.
I'm making a journey to meet the extraordinary animals that live on the high grasslands of the Tibetan Plateau.
It's the largest and highest plateau on Earth, home to some unusual creatures. High-flying bar-headed geese, massive shaggy wild yak, pika, the pocket-sized cousins of hares, the curious Tibetan fox, herds of beautiful wild ass called kiang, and a very rare animal unique to this extraordinary part of China. But more of that once I'm on board.
There we go, thank you.
The train is heading to Tibet, the roof of the world. Just the sort of place where you'd expect to find something very special.
My main mission is tracking down the endangered Tibetan antelope, or chiru. The train will take me right to the edge of their home on the Tibetan Plateau, one of the highest and most remote landscapes on Earth. It's a vast area, so there's no guarantee I'll find this amazing antelope. I've been incredibly lucky before though. Over the last 12 months, I've encountered some of China's rarest mammals.
In the huge Gobi Desert, it's hard to find anything alive, let alone an endangered animal.
With only 2 days to search, I really didn't think we'd find a Bactrian camel. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack.
In the bamboo forests of Sichuan, I managed to spot an elusive red panda doing a bit of grooming.
I was starting to believe I'd never seen one. They're such a rarity in the wild. There's only about 3,000 remaining. He's away. Yes.
And in the far south, I tracked down elephants.
Asian elephants here in China. This is fabulous. China is the only country in Asia where the population of elephants is on the increase. There's around 300 here.
I hope my luck holds on this mission. The chiru is a notoriously shy antelope. It's very much at home on the high altitude plains of the Tibetan Plateau, and I'll only be seeing a fraction of them. Just getting through the mountains into Tibet is a really big challenge.
I'm riding a record-breaking railway. It's the highest in the world. The track climbs to over 5,000 metres. That's so high, each passenger has their own oxygen supply, and there's doctors on board in case anyone suffers from altitude sickness.
I'll be getting off well below that. You sometimes see animals from the train, but I plan to get much closer to them. After a full day's journey, the train pulls into Gulmud. At just below 3,000 metres, this is the bustling gateway to the Tibetan Plateau, and it's where my journey really begins. From here, it's a few hundred kilometres onward and upward to Hokshu Reserve, the heart of Chiru country. And the best way to get there is by road. So I've hired a 4x4 and a local guide. We're heading south through dusty plains surrounded by fierce, jagged mountains. From the car, I catch a glimpse of the train on the final leg of its climb to Lhasa, the Tibetan capital. Swapping the train for the car means we can easily pull over to explore and investigate the wildlife.
Shishnik, a beautiful spot. Let's see if there's any animals.
This little valley has plenty of plants. They attract insects, which in turn attract lizards.
Lots of little lizards scurrying around. Let's see if I can catch one to show you. There's one just run into a clump of grass over here. He thinks I can't see him, but I can just see the scales of his back. And got you. This is a beautiful little lizard. It's called a Tibetan toad-headed agama. Lovely markings on the back and a great patch of black underneath. You can tell he's a male by the thick base to the tail. You can see the black and white markings on the tail as well that he used for signalling, curling it round like a clock spring. He's a fat little thing. He obviously does well up here. He's had a good summer catching insects. This is quite a high altitude lizard. We're above 3,500 metres here. Lizard with a home with a mountain view. Beautiful. Away you go.
Summers are short here, so animals must make the most of them for births and babies.
I heard a noise and look, there's a couple of baby redstarts just out of the nest waiting to be fed.
These adorable chicks are white-winged redstarts. If they're males, that rather dull fluff will eventually turn into beautiful black and white plumage with a fiery orange chest. These two are just out of the nest and must get in some vital practice flights. But up here the wind can be too strong for even the most determined chick.
You can't get much cuter than they are. I'm going to leave them now so the parents can come back to feed them.
Before a dinner of insects, it's time for another courageous leap into the void. This mishap won't deter them. In a day or two, they'll both be cruising with confidence, even in this wind.
I'm nearly 4,800 metres high on the Kunlun Pass. This is the kingdom of the Chiru.
These prayer flags mark the start of the plateau itself, and you can tell by this shrine just how much has gone into protecting the Chiru. Coming up, I meet some high flyers, and there's a scene that reminds me of Africa.
Chiru aren't the only large mammals on the Tibetan plateau. Look at these over here.
These colourful prayer flags mean we've made it to the Tangular Pass. It's the gateway to the Tibetan plateau and the start of Chiru country. I'm headed for the Hokshu Reserve. It's one of the most isolated wildlife havens in the world. It was set up in 1995 specially to protect the Chiru. Surrounded by 14 of the highest peaks in the world, these plains are great territory for agile antelopes, but not so good for us flat-footed humans. There are holes everywhere.
It seems that most of the Tibetan plateau is riddled with burrows. They're made by close cousins of the rabbits and hares. Look at these droppings here. They're just like miniature rabbit droppings. At night, the animal that made them produces very different droppings. They're soft, squishy and black. It eats them, which sounds pretty gross, but all members of the rabbit and hare family do that to save vital vitamins that would otherwise be lost. These pocket-sized hares make hay while the sun shines. You can see it all here drying outside the burrow. When it's dry, they'll drag it underground to tide them over the long, hard winter. Let's see if we can see one of them.
I'm sure if I'm still and quiet, curiosity will get the better of them.
There's one, pika or mouse hare.
Because of their high-pitched alarm calls, pikas are sometimes called whistling hares too. They really are tiny, weighing in at between 120 and 350 grams.
They're popping up all over the place now. There's around 30 species of pika in the world. You can see why this one is called the black-lipped. Pikas play a valuable role here on the Tibetan plateau. Their burrows help soil fertility and provide homes for birds and reptiles. Some birds with real character over there, Hume's ground tits. They often live around pikas.
These charismatic birds are related to blue tits and great tits. But these tits have specially adapted curved bills that enable them to dig for insects, and there are plenty of those even at these altitudes. Another favourite feeding technique of Hume's ground tits is checking out yak dung. Insects can be found underneath. Pikas and ground tits often feed together, and if danger threatens, the bird warns the mammal and vice versa. Black-lipped pika are also known as plateau pika. They're unusual because males and females both look after the babies. In most pika species, parenting is down to mum. Families live in extensive burrow networks, so they can pop out anywhere and disappear just as easily down the nearest hole at the first sign of danger.
Pikas are also the staple diet for many of the predators here. Foxes, falcons and buzzards, they love eating these.
A lookout gives a high-pitched alarm squeak to warn of danger. The pikas scuttle for safety. A hungry upland buzzard stakes out a burrow in the hope of finding a meal. But he can't cover them all. These towering peaks and sweeping plains are a real challenge to every creature that lives here, including human beings. My challenge is to find the elusive chiru, and I hope I can do it before the weather changes again. This grassland looks like good antelope territory. But I'm keeping my eyes peeled for other creatures as well. The terrain may look harsh, arid and empty, but it supports a lot of life.
Swimming in a pool over there, some real high flyers. They're a graceful species of goose, the bar-headed, one of my favourites. This white neck with these two crescents of black. There's a gosling in there too with just a black neck. These birds breed on these high altitude lakes in northern Asia. It's too cold here in winter for these geese, so they fly to places like India in South Asia. To do that, they fly right over the top of the Himalayas. They fly higher than almost any other bird. They've been seen at over 8,000 metres. There have even been some reports of them overflying Mount Everest.
That's nearly 9,000 metres above sea level. You'd think the geese would freeze, but they have a downy underlayer of feathers that prevents that, and a waterproof outer layer which stops ice building up. And they can fly at 80 kilometres an hour.
Bar-headed geese are one of the specials of the Tibetan Plateau. I'm really pleased I caught up with them.
These birds may be well adapted to the cold here, but they don't hang around for the winter. They'll soon head south to India.
This is a glorious place, but moving around is really hard work. I'm 5,000 metres up. The air is very thin, making it hard to breathe. I've got a splitting headache because of the altitude. I'm thirsty all of the time.
But it's worth it to have the chance to come to this remote and magical place. On my journey so far, I've seen lots of smaller animals. Out here on the open plains, I'm hoping to sight bigger game.
Chiru aren't the only large mammals on the Tibetan Plateau. Look at these over here. It's hard moving quickly at this altitude, but it's well worth it. Kiang, the wild ass of the Tibetan Plateau. Group of 4 ahead of me there. There's another group over there. And moving with them, there's Tibetan gazelles.
These dainty animals are smaller than Chiru. Groups of females and fawns graze together. The more solitary males have horns, great weapons in the autumn fights for dominance. They don't seem nervous of me at all. Tibetan gazelles were once very rare, but there are now 250,000 of them on the plateau. All thanks to a ban on hunting. Young males chase each other, getting in training for the coming mating season. The Kiang live in small groups, but often herd together for safety.
This is amazing. It's like being on the African plains.
It's coming up to the breeding season, so hopeful male Kiang are beginning to follow groups of females.
I think the stallion's noticed I'm here. He's looking right at me.
Kiang stallions are just a little larger than the mares. They stand around 140 centimetres at the shoulder, which makes them a bit bigger than a donkey. Born last summer, this foal is around a year old. Very soon it will have to fend for itself when its mother breeds again. But at least its coat gives it some protection from weather that can change without warning.
This is wonderful wildlife viewing in a hailstorm. Chunks of ice bouncing off my head. Chunks of ice on the ground. There were so many firsts in that for me. I've never seen a kayang before. I've never watched game in a hailstorm. That was terrific stuff. The plateau is so high, hail or snow are much more common than rain here. Even in summer, the nights can be bitter. I'm so pleased I've got a thick sleeping bag. It's been a great first day. Tomorrow I'll continue my search for Chiru. After the break, I get a glimpse of a Tibetan fox in action and meet something very shaggy.
This is such a surprise. A very rare animal indeed.
Lake on China's Tibetan Plateau. My search for the Chiru antelope has brought me to one of the holiest places in Tibet. You almost feel you can touch the sky here. It's one of several high-altitude lakes that feed great rivers like the Yangtze, the Indus and the Mekong, and it teems with bird life. It's home to bar-headed geese that are adapted to be able to breathe in thin air. And they can soar to great heights in this rarefied atmosphere on extra large and powerful wings. At the edges of the lake, the world's most handsome wild ass, the kiang, ekes out nourishment and moisture from hardy scrub. But personally, I like a heartier breakfast, preferably with a little company. These tiny black-lipped pikas live off grass, moss, lichen and low-lying shrubs. So fortunately, I don't think muesli and yoghurt is on their menu. I'm going to need all my energy today for the task ahead. These pint-sized cousins of rabbits and hares seem to be everywhere. They're great company for any traveller, even one on a mission like mine. This is such a pretty spot. I had a lovely breakfast with pikas. I hope today's the day I see a chiru, a Tibetan antelope, for the first time. This really is chiru country. You'd think it would be easy to find a herd here. The trouble is, this grassland seems to spread out endlessly in all directions. These plains are 5,000 metres above sea level. The animals that live here are acclimatised to the altitude, but it's been a real struggle for me. At least my headache's gone, and it hasn't stopped me searching. There's one of those pika predators I was talking about, a Tibetan fox, coming right through the grass towards me. Beautiful animal. I think she's got something in her mouth. I think she's carrying a pika. And there's some cubs there too. I just see their heads, there's two of them there. One of the cubs is looking right at me, so different from our foxes at home. They really look Tibetan. And Mum's not going to the cubs. She's veered away from them. She's dropped the pika. And she's burying it. She must be caching it for later.
Must be so easy being a fox here. There's so many pikas everywhere. Away she goes. Brilliant.
The vixen needs to catch 6 or 7 pikas a day to feed her growing cubs. And in the unlikely event she can't manage that, there could be rodents, lizards, and even small birds on the menu.
There's wildlife everywhere here. I was checking out this wetland for chiru coming down to drink and spotted some magnificent birds. Even though they're a long way off, you can see the bustle of black feathers at the back and the black necks. There's only around 6,000 pairs of black-necked cranes. They're a real speciality of the Tibetan Plateau. They don't breed anywhere else. Cranes are so majestic. I love them. Before we'd started shooting Untamed China, I'd seen all the species in the world except one.
I went to Inner Mongolia to see the demoiselle crane. There's 15 species of crane in the world. Until today, I'd seen 14 of them. The demoiselle crane completes the set. That's why I'm chuffed to bits. I'm just as excited seeing these blacknecks today.
Because of their remote breeding areas, blacknecks were the last crane species to be discovered by science. They weren't named and described until 1876.
Wildlife is so abundant here, there must be chiru somewhere. This plain of gravel or shale looks a great spot. There's certainly something out there, but it's way too big to be an antelope.
Just look at this, much larger, much rarer than a pika, a wild yak. You can see it's a wild one by this long shaggy fur, almost reaching the ground. This is a male. You can tell that by these big sweeping horns, much more massive than a female's. And bulls are often solitary. Females live in herds of around 30. But this is such a surprise. A very rare animal indeed. A wild yak.
The Tibetan Plateau is one of the last strongholds of these magnificent creatures. They've been driven to extinction in Bhutan and Nepal, and there may be less than 2,000 left here. Their domesticated cousins are much smaller. They're vital to human survival up here. Lu Ying and her family own 120, a typical sized herd for the region. Domesticated yaks provide food, fuel and transport. Yak milk is a rich source of energy and calcium. It's mainly churned into butter, the chief ingredient of the local tea. The butter is used to fuel lamps and is even carved into sculptures for festivals. There's yak cheese as well, a local delicacy. Nobody's quite sure when yaks were first domesticated, but the story goes that they were first tamed not for food, but for their tails. They were a favoured fly swat for Roman empresses. The herd provides wool and meat as well as dairy products. To ensure Lu Ying and her family have a regular milk supply, the yak calves remain with their mothers. Nothing is wasted here. On the high plateau there are few trees, so readily available yak dung is dried out to provide valuable fuel. All this, and the yaks are beasts of burden as well. They carry farmers, traders and goods through high mountain passes, where horses would find the going difficult.
Now for my first taste of yak milk tea. Cheers on!
Good. How you doing? Thank you. Lovely.
That's lovely. This is the first Tibetan home I've ever been into, but on my travels through China, I've met many of the ethnic groups that live here.
Across China's 22 provinces, there are something like 56 different ethnic groups. Many of them have real and ancient bonds with animals. In the far south, the Bai people have fished Lake Erhai with the help of cormorants for centuries.
Well done, boy, you'll get your reward. Brilliant, they're doing well, aren't they?
Far in the north, in Inner Mongolia, the Awenki people have domesticated reindeer. In Jinghong, on the border with Thailand, the Dai people revere elephants. Since the time of Genghis Khan, the horse has been central to life on the steppes of Mongolia. And Mongolians even make tea from horse milk.
That's very good. Good? Bye-bye.
As I set off once again in search of the elusive Chiru, I can't help but think of the long journey we humans have shared with animals. Of how much we rely on them, and how we need to ensure their survival by preserving places like this.
We're travelling along the main road that leads to Lhasa in Tibet. There's many accounts of Chiru right next to the highway. There's been reports of Chiru moving along this river. 100 years ago, it would have been easy to see a Chiru. There were millions of them on the Tibetan plateau, but the teeming herds were slaughtered for their fur. Their wool is used to make expensive scarves and shawls called chatouche or ring shawls. The wool is so fine they can be dragged through a wedding ring. Then the Chinese government set up heavily policed reserves like Oxio to protect the remaining Chiru from poachers.
Coming up, I find tracks in the mud. Could it be the mysterious antelope at last?
Look, in a pasture over there.
I'm 5,000 metres above sea level on the Tibetan plateau. I'm on the trail of the elusive Chiru.
That's the railway track I started my journey in Shining on. Caused a great controversy amongst conservationists when it was built because this crosses the migration route of the Chiru. But the government spent 7% of the construction budget to build these passageways for the Chiru to go underneath.
They were vital for the survival of this endangered antelope.
Here's evidence of Chiru, a trackway. They're stocky antelope, so their footprints are larger and deeper than Tibetan gazelles. Two of them have walked along here.
look. In a pasture over there. There's a group of them.
At last.
The herd have moved right under the railway line. They certainly seem to be getting used to the track.
They're heading down from the summer calving grounds to the southern pasture lands for winter, a migration of up to 300 kilometres. This area is one of 4 reserves set aside by the government to protect rare plateau species like the chiru.
Other than a small population in Kashmir, India, you can only see them in China. They certainly don't seem too bothered by the train. They're grazing just underneath the track.
These look in good shape. A healthy male can weigh as much as 35 kilos.
There's a male in the group. They have such distinctive horns, almost vertical. They can be 70 centimetres long, sweeping forward at the tip.
Like other antelope, male chiru are usually solitary, but come together in autumn to fight for mates. Those horns look like pretty useful weapons. This male's shedding his coat. Big chunks of fur are hanging off him. He's not sick, he's just getting rid of the coarse layer of outer fur that's protected his soft and woolly undercoat this season.
Mothers with calves here. They have one baby, normally in June. So these must be about 2 months old.
Mum and calf will stick together for well over a year.
This is such a privilege. I couldn't have hoped for better. Chiru are very nervous animals. But this herd have been approaching me closer and closer.
Now that hunting is banned, the chiru have few predators. Their biggest threat up here is wolves, not humans.
They're so relaxed with me here. They're laying down in their daybeds, depressions in the soil. That conceals them from predators and probably keeps biting insects at bay. If they hadn't been protected just in time, chiru would have disappeared forever. Some of China's other animals need the same kind of help.
With around 1.5 billion people, China is the world's most populous nation. This mass of humanity is putting the spectacular habitats and creatures of untamed China under real pressure. Some animals have long been exploited for traditional medicines.
This is one of China's most peculiar mammals, the Chinese pangolin. Sadly, they're quite rare in China because these beautiful creatures are killed for their scales.
Nowadays, many Asian turtle species are threatened by overhunting. As prosperity increases in China, more and more people can afford expensive delicacies like turtle flesh. Other animals are being loved to death. Most cities have markets full of birds which are prized for their beauty or songs. Taken from grasslands and forests, many are ill-suited for life in a cage. Birds have been revered by Chinese people for millennia. 3,000 years ago, the Jincha people created a magnificent work of art in pure gold. It shows sacred birds carrying the sun across the sky. This respect for untamed China and its animals is showing a resurgence today. Across the country, many people have a deep appreciation for the nation's wildlife treasures and want to protect and understand them. As I found out, these efforts are paying off. In Yunnan, in the south of the country, I visited rare primates that are found nowhere else on Earth. A few years ago, the extraordinary Yunnan snub-nosed monkeys were on the verge of extinction. Now the old-growth forests they rely on have been protected. So their population has recovered from just a couple of hundred to a few thousand individuals. And their numbers are still on the increase. Spending time with these monkeys, with their huge lips and amused expressions, was one of the highlights of my time in China. Further north in Shanxi province, one of the country's greatest conservation successes has been the recovery of the crested ibis.
These birds really came back from the brink.
They're certainly the rarest birds I've ever been filmed with. A remarkable story, only 7 in 1981, around 1,000 today, all due to terrific conservation efforts in China.
And then, of course, there's the most iconic of Chinese animals. In many ways, the story of the giant panda says it all. With 50 bamboo forest reserves, there's great optimism over the future of the much-loved black and white bears in the wild. I travelled to Chengdu, the panda capital of the world. At the city's world-renowned panda base, they've cracked the problems with breeding in captivity. Cubs born here at the base could soon be boosting the numbers of pandas in the wild.
As Panda Ambassador, it's great to announce some super news. The captive population of pandas has reached a magic number of 300, which means the Chengdu Panda Base are thinking about releasing some of them back into the wild.
On the Tibetan plateau, Chiru are another success story. As I found out, they may be hard to track down, but numbers are on the up.
Protected in reserves, Chiru are coming back. There may be as many as 150,000 of them now. They're a real symbol of hope in untamed China.
I really hope you've enjoyed my Chinese adventures. See you again soon.